All right, hello everyone. We are live. Today we
Hey,
are doing a marathon debunking of Genesis Apologetics. They are a group that have really pissed me off, and quite a bunch of people with their false DCMA copyright flagging.
yes,
So,
Dave's a little quiet today.
what was that? So, today we're going to be doing a takedown of some of their videos. Don't forget to hit the like button. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button because I have quite a bit of content coming up, and I've invited a couple people who will be kind of rotating in and out as we go on. So welcome. Feel free to introduce yourself and plug in your channel and what stuff you have coming up. Can you hear me? Is my audio good?
Up there, I hear you.
Audio
now,
check.
now, yes, your audio is good now. My audio was bad for a second.
It's not a problem. Hey, Creo, welcome. Hello, Laurie. Thank you so much for joining. So with that, let's jump right in. There's a couple of videos that I'm going to want to respond to. The first is, where do the races come from? Hello, Scott Duke. Thank you for joining us. Share my screen, Chrome tab, Genesis Apologetics. Don't forget to click share audio. And where do the races come from? This is the first video that we are going to be.
Oh, this is going to be a fun one.
Talking about. Let me put this in full screen. And there we go. That should be good. All right. I can't wait to see the monstrosity of this video.
People think of when it comes to race, skin color, hair type or color, physical features. Just why do we have these differences? Well, if you look outside of biblical explanations, you'll find that we've explained race in a variety of ways over the years, ranging from views that had neutral effects in society to views that led to horrific outcomes. Let's take a few minutes to compare secular and biblical views on the topic of race. Let's start with the secular view. Over the last few centuries, the world has come up with several different ideas about race. Because these views are at the heart of how we regard and treat people, these viewpoints have had major consequences. But first, a disclaimer. Many people have done amazing things to dismantle racism at many levels. It should also be said that today, most non-Christian Americans don't hold blatantly racist views. We also acknowledge that, historically, many self-professed Christians have done horrendous things in the name of race, even claiming their views were supported by Scripture. One point we'll make in this video is that sound interpretation of Scripture leaves absolutely no room for racism, whereas evolution theory leaves plenty. Let's look at some...
Really?
So, yeah, this is basically their attempt to poison the well. This is a classic example of poisoning the well fallacy, which is basically a fallacy where adverse information about the target is presented to an audience. So basically claiming that evolution results in racism is somehow a ticket to saying evolution is therefore false. That being said, their video...
I would say, is this like they're trying to compare like evolution with they call it back in the day social Darwinism?
Yeah, basically that's where I think they're kind of going with this. And I will say that the video rightfully notes that many Christians have been deeply racist in the past. And
in the past, a lot of
yeah,
today.
And the Southern Baptist Church, for example, split away from the Northern Baptists over the issue of slavery. The Southern Baptists wanted to keep the slaves. And it's important to note that all of this was long before Darwin. So racist views have been around much longer than Darwin has. So classic example of poisoning the well. That being said,
like I said, like people have been racist forever. If they some people might have used evolution to some people might have used evolution to promote racism. Some of them didn't. It's not, they'll use anything they want to promote their cause.
That is exactly correct. Great point. People who are racist, they will do whatever they want to justify it. People justified racism by claiming that Africans were the curse of Cain or whatever, or the or what have you. And
or they're the ones that evolved from the monkeys or chimps.
Right. That being said, the modern view, the modern scientific view, is that there is no such thing as race. Race is purely a social construct, and a very bad social construct that all humans share a most recent common ancestor, both on the mitochondrial DNA and the white DNA about 300,000 years ago to 60,000 years ago. Now, obviously, it should be pointed out that they weren't the same couple, like Adam and Eve. But that being said, all humans can trace their origins back to Africa. Simply does not exist and has no scientific meaning whatsoever.
Well, Africa, you mean we're not from the Middle East from a boat?
That is correct. So, yeah. So, great job poisoning the well.
Some history that supports this perspective, beginning with the framer of mainstream evolution theory, Charles Darwin. Darwin promoted some strong ideas about race that influenced a number of world leaders over the last 150 years.
No, not that there. Most of those people they didn't like Darwin, and
yeah, it's also important. Yeah, and Hitler was, of course, a Catholic, and basically said that his movement was Christian. That being said, many of the communists did not like Darwin. Bourgeois science, Darwin. I'm just gonna look this up real quick. Basically, some of these communists and socialists thought Darwinism was bourgeois science or whatever. I think, if I'm not mistaken, they preferred others. They preferred Lamarckism. Just reading the Wikipedia page real quick. Campaign by Trofim Lysenko against genetics and science-based agriculture in the mid-20th century, rejecting natural selection in favor of Lamarckism. So this is more than 3,000 mainstream biologists were dismissed, were imprisoned, and numerous scientists were executed in the campaign to suppress scientific opponents. And this was happening in Russia. So to say that Darwin influenced Hitler and Stalin is just all kinds of wrong. Hello, Opie. Welcome. Feel free to introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Opie. This is like the only second time I've been on somebody else's stream before, but no. So I've been in some of the group chats with everybody else, so I just got an invite, so I said hi.
Oh, very nice. Well, welcome. Thank you so much for joining.
Hello.
So yeah, let's continue with this video.
Darwin's first mainstream book was published in 1859 with the full title, On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favored Race.
Okay, it should be noted that the word race and the context of Darwin does not mean the same thing as we consider race. In the scientific literature back in the 1800s, there were even considered races of cabbage and stuff like that. If I'm not mistaken, he is using. I can't remember exactly the context of the.
Like what we call species or something.
Yes, basically. But yeah, he did not mean race in the way that we commonly understand it today. That's just simply not the case at all.
In the struggle for life, Darwin's second book, The Descent of Man, included a chapter titled The Races of Man, where Darwin stated, At some future period, not very distant as measured by centuries, the civilized races of man will almost certainly exterminate and replace the savage races throughout the world. The break between man and his nearest allies will then be wider, for it will intervene between man in a more civilized state, as we may hope. Even then, the Caucasian and some ape as low as the baboon, instead of as now between the Negro or Australian and the gorilla. Darwin's belief was obvious.
Okay, a question.
If man evolved, then so did the various.
Question fast. Those 3 dots means a lot of stuff has been left out between those 2 paragraphs there.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that this is a blatant quote mine. That being said, again, this is simply poisoning the well, saying that Darwin was a racist. Darwin held negative views towards other races, therefore Darwin is bad. Classic example of an ad hominem, classic example of poisoning the well. Let's see here. I am trying to find that quote right now. I'm just kind of see what he quotes. Notable Charles Darwin's misquote.
So, Opie, what's your opinion on all this? You're quiet.
No, sorry. No, like if you read Descent of Man, also like it doesn't even read like as if Darwin is a racist person. Like he's just trying to understand the natural world and a natural historical explanation of how man evolved, but like it's never really anything like one particular population is like superior over the other, really.
Yep. Let's see here. Trying to think. So, I'm just gonna try and figure out where this quote comes from or whatever. But but again, even if this is correct, it's still poisoning the well. It's still a fallacy. It's still wrong to say that Darwin held racist views, therefore Darwinism and evolution is wrong. This is complete nonsense.
Races, and the Caucasian race was farther along in the evolutionary process, thus making them superior to other races. It's beliefs like these that spread into society and led to fiascos like Ota Banga being displayed in the Bronx Zoo with an orangutan to demonstrate a step in the process of human evolution. Over 40,000 people a day visited the exhibition for 20 days until sensible people, mostly Christian pastors, brought it to an end. As Darwinism grew more mainstream, the stakes grew higher and higher. Professor Richard Wiechard has published dozens of works on the Darwin-Nazi connection. Wiechard states, Hitler, like many German biologists and anthropologists in the early 20th century,
Godwin's law fallacy, too many Hitlers on the field.
embraced Darwin's theory of human evolution. He believed that some human races are more highly evolved than other human races. These unequal races are locked in an unavoidable struggle for existence that manifests itself in an economic and social competition, as well as warfare and even racial extermination.
Again,
he thought he was helping humans.
Darwinism, back to social Darwinism again.
Yeah, I don't think Aaron Ra did a good video on replying to this, so I am going to play a little bit of Aaron Ra's video right after we're finished with this.
Humans evolved to higher levels by favoring the superior races and eliminating the inferior ones. Hitler based his policy of expansionist warfare on the idea of a Darwinian biologist turned geographer, Friedrich Ratzel, who argued that the struggle for existence was essentially a struggle for living space to enable the superior race to expand in. The Nazi Party started laying the foundation for the actions of Hitler's future army by showing films like this one in every theater in Germany.
Alles Lebensschwache geht in der Natur unfehlbar zugrunde. Wir Menschen haben gegen dieses Gesetz der natürlichen Auslese in den letzten Jahrzehnten furchtbar gesündigt. Wir haben unwertes Leben nicht nur erhalten, wir haben ihm auch Vermehrung gewährt. Die Nachkommen dieser Kranken sahen so aus. Gesunde Menschen wohnten in engen, lichtlosen Gassen und halb verfallenen Lauben.
Yes.
Idioten und Schwachsinnigen baute man aber Paläste. Und diese kranken Menschen waren gar nicht empfänglich für die Schönheit, mit der man sie umgab.
So basically, he's saying we gotta
Ausmaß dieses Elends
get rid of all the people, the sick people. Don't have sex with sick people. Just have healthy people and stuff, and we'll be all nice and stuff.
Yeah, basically. I'm just gonna skip this part real quick. Just skip ahead, just to get the point. Again, classic poisoning the well fallacy. Racism, of course, has been around much longer than Darwin and the theory of evolution. So basically, this is just a fallacy through and through, and all of that. So let's continue.
Clearly shows how Darwin's ideas were used to persuade an army to do incredibly barbaric things to certain people groups. The effects of Darwinism weren't limited to just Europe in the Second World War. Charles Darwin visited Australia in 1836 and noted that the Aboriginal population was in decline. He believed that as the stronger British thrived, it was likely that Aboriginal peoples in Australia would soon be completely wiped out. These ideas later led to the forced assimilation of over 100,000 plus Aboriginal children who were abducted from their families between 1910 and 1970. Next, let's look at the biblical view on race. While the Bible's take on race has remained constant since it was written, many have run astray with false interpretations, and some of these were driven by impure motives. But a plain reading through Scripture reveals there were two humans created at the beginning in the image of God, and not in the image of apes. Indeed, Adam was not one of the animals. Rather, God had him.
So, not in the image of apes. Then why are humans apes? Why are humans mammals? Why are we primates?
Yeah, we're not animals at all. We are totally different animals, even though we have the same structure as animals and all that stuff, but we're not animals.
No, and
Yep.
the history of like social Darwinism actually comes out of like vitalism in the 18th century and 19th century, where people believe like, you know, humans are, you know, somehow separate from animals in like some special essentialist way, and then they further graph that onto like somehow Caucasian people have some essential property that is better than other races. So it's actually not coming from Darwinism; it's coming from them themselves. There.
Yeah, I forget where it was, but I remember seeing like this thing comparing the different races of people back then with the different like apes of the land, like, you know, I forget where it was at. I forget what I'm talking about. They try to compare. I'm like, oh, Darwin thinks that these people came from this monkeys and this monkeys.
I can't remember either.
Yep.
I'll look it up while you're playing the video.
Name the animals and then take dominion over them. Adam and Eve's DNA was perfect. Their genome included all the necessary programming for the variability that we see today in various people groups. Some of the different.
Okay, so this kind of begs the question: what does a perfect genome look like? What is meant by this term? It just seems.
Well, apparently it's good enough for. Apparently, it means it's good enough for incest breeding for a few generations because that's all they could do is sisters or cousins, and then they do it again with Noah's kids. It's that good. You can have sex with your sister or cousin without any genetic inbreeding. That's what it means.
Yep. 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 All right, let's continue.
Differences we observe with people today are also due to mutations that began compounding after the fall. The genealogies in Genesis provide a clear map at about 6,000 years ago. Interestingly, secular research on mitochondrial DNA mutation rates actually confirms this biblical timeline, demonstrating that we all come from a single woman who lived only about 6,000 years ago.
No, more like 300,000 years ago.
Mutation rate is even used by the FBI in forensic investigations. Then, just 10 generations after Adam and Eve, the entire human genome was bottlenecked to just 8 people survived a year-long flood.
Which, of course, is completely impossible for so many reasons.
This genetic bottleneck is partially responsible for the shortened lifespans of those who lived after the...
Lots of issues with the whole issues of a global flood reducing everything down to 2 individuals. Of course, how do we rebound the population so quickly? How was it possible for us to have enough people to build the Tower of Babel in less than 110 years post-flood? So yeah, so many problems, so little time to address all of them, but those are the biggies.
The flood. The post-flood population increased quickly and was later dispersed as over 70 language groups spread around the globe after God confused their languages at Babel. Genesis 10:32 records.
Yeah, again, like there, that like species and stuff explode slowly. Languages they not create 70 languages at one time, just like that. It like divide up from one to again, like that's
like a genealogy tree. Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's seems to be echo coming from David's audio.
Yeah, I am sorry. I'm gonna have to mute myself while the video is playing.
You want headphones?
The sons of Noah, according to their generations, in their nations, and from these nations were divided on the earth after the flood. Recent scientific studies even confirmed there was explosive human population growth and DNA variability that occurred about the same time period. The New Testament also confirms God's plan to spread the nations over the earth, and he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings. Are there differences between people groups today? Of course. The variety we see in people today, which exists both within and between people groups, is because of the pre-engineered adaptability that God established within the language of our DNA. Some of the differences we see are also due to mutations, or DNA copying mistakes. But the traits we typically use to categorize race groups are superficial, such as differences in skin, hair, and eye color. These traits account for less than 0.012% of human genetic differences, or 1 gene out of 12,000. Let's take a look at skin color. What would cause some people to have very dark skin, while other skin is lighter? Skin color depends on the level and type of pigment called melanin that special cells in the skin called melanocytes produce. Melanin protects the skin by absorbing and scattering the ultraviolet radiation that otherwise would have been absorbed by the DNA, causing mutations. People with darker skin fare better in places with intense sunlight for most of the year, like around the equator. Having darker skin helps in these places by protecting against skin cancer, folate deficiency, a cause of spina bifida, tropical ulcers, and other skin diseases. Light-skinned people from the frozen north who visit lower latitude sunny locations have less melanin to block the sun's UVB rays. This is the main reason that whites in the US have 25 times the rate of melanoma skin cancer compared to blacks. People with lighter skin thrive better up north where there is less sunlight because their lighter pigment allows greater absorption of vitamin D from the sun. Vitamin D is needed for healthy bones, protection against rickets, and certain cancers. This skin shade climate interaction drove people groups to live in areas where they would thrive. Isn't it amazing how God's command for us to be fruitful and multiply and later spread around the earth was made possible by the pre-engineered adaptability that he designed into our genetic code? When the Lord spoke to Samuel to choose the next leader for Israel, he said, "Do not look at his appearance or at his physical stature, for the Lord does not see as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." To wrap this up, let's hear some wise words from Pastor Ephraim Smith.
Hey, so that's why he picked a guy that was eventually pissed God off later on.
You and I were created in the very image of God. The very image of God. Let that really sink into your heart today. We were not created like the animals. Animals are created after their kinds. So let's just think of animals on the ground. A giraffe.
So this, of course, begs the question, what is a kind? Oh, God. Hello, Team Dodgeball. The damage control going well? Ha, 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 ha. Oh, boy. So, yeah, what on earth is a kind? And even the Bible says that man is gosh. Like the animals. So,
were you, off topic of, were you Team Dodgeball? Did you like dodgeball in school?
Not really.
Yeah, neither did I.
I'm not a sports person. Just not my thing.
Neither am I. I got hit in the head twice in one day in dodgeball.
Oh yeah.
I frankly enjoyed it, but that was just me.
Yeah.
Back to our regular
and a hippopotamus. I was just recently at the Sacramento Zoo, and so I saw giraffes. And I saw that, again, I was reminded that animals are created after their own kind. You're never going to see a giraffe and a hippopotamus start dating to develop.
Yeah, if a hippopotamus and a giraffe started dating, then the theory of evolution would be overturned. This is called the Law of Monofilament. It's really not that hard. I don't understand why people can't understand the Law of Monofilament.
Yeah, because that would be a very awkward honeymoon too, I think.
Yeah. So yeah, if giraffe ever gave birth to a hippopotamus, and it is safe to say that the theory of evolution, as it is understood, would be completely overturned. So yeah.
Develop a covenant relationship and have a hipporaph. Like, that's never going to happen. There's no hipporaphs because God created animals to be in their own kind, but he didn't create human beings like that. We weren't meant to be in the black kind, the white kind, the red kind, the yellow kind, the brown kind. God created one humanity, one blood in the image of God, higher than the angels.
Again, like, yeah, you guys are saying that. It's like that.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Giraffes. Yeah, species, you know, it's like, are you comparing like giraffes and hippos to different cultures and stuff? Like, no, they can't. They literally can't interbreed. We can interbreed still.
Yeah. So let's continue.
We live in a world that has a social man-made construct that says, based on the color of your skin, your physical features, where you were born, your accent, whether your parents had money or not, whether you were small town, suburban, or inner city, we decide who's smart, who's dumb, who's fast, who's slow, who can clap on beat, who shouldn't bother to clap, who should be feared, and who should be revered. All of this based on those things. That's not the image of God. Yes, issues of race and class, they're real. They're real. But the church, believers, beloved children of God, we are to rise up and model what it means to be a Christ-centered, multi-ethnic, transformative movement. You and I are not limited to the physical. We should be driven by the spiritual.
Are you a Christian student looking for answers about what?
Advertisement there.
So yeah, all kinds of bad. In summary, even if every single thing in that video is correct, ultimately, this falls to a fallacy.
And nothing to do with evolution at all.
Exactly. And modern scientific understanding of race is that it is non-existent. Race simply does not exist. That being said, I do want to play a little bit of Aaron Ra's. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but Aaron Ra did make a really good video addressing his criticism of racial Darwinism. So I am going to share my screen and just play a tiny little bit of it. And I'm going to link this in the sidebar chat. One moment. This is Aaron Ra's video on racial Darwinism. And let's play a little bit of this.
February 12, 2009 was Charles Darwin's 200th birthday. Since then, a growing number of individual groups have held annual celebrations of science on Darwin Day. These typically feature animal shows, children's activities, and speakers promoting intellectual bravery, honest curiosity, as well as scientific skepticism and secularism, especially in areas where religious extremism threatens education. Creationists have told a lot of lies about our man Chucky D. They said that he didn't believe his own theory, that he thought that the evolution of the eye was supposed to be absurd in the highest degree. It didn't matter what he said immediately after that about what reason tells him. They said he recanted his belief on his deathbed, another lie flatly denied by his family who were at his bedside. Creationists often comment that Darwinism begat racism and that Christians accept that every human is one of God's children. They say that as if those who accept that cannot also believe in God. They don't know their own history either. Before Darwin ever published this theory, and for millennia before he was even born, many Christians commonly believed that different races were not even related. Before Darwin suggested common ancestry, both religious and non-religious people thought that the various races of men had no common ancestors at all. Some believed that the different races they perceived were convergently derived from different species, or that they spontaneously generated from different sources. Those who believed in God proposed other options. Mormons, for example, believed that black skin was the mark of the devil. Others believed that the Genesis character Cain got his mystery bride from among the apes. Still others believe that God created other kinds of people from other atoms that weren't mentioned in the Bible and who predate anyone the Bible mentions by name. In another creation myth, the Titan Prometheus created both people and animals all out of clay, just like the Semitic gods did in Enuma Elish and Genesis, among other fables. Then each of these clay figurines had life literally breathed into it. The father god Zeus said that Prometheus made too many animals and forced him to turn some of them into men, albeit with bestial souls. This is the first reference to creationists believing that some people were fully human and that some were essentially soulless animals. But that's just the beginning. This thing was repeated again and again down through history. How could Darwin have instilled such racism into people that lived before him? It was not Darwin, but the authors of antiquity who numbered the races and called them inferior. Darwin proposed a tree of life where different lineages could be equally evolved, but Aristotle proposed a ladder of life where you have higher and lower life forms, where one race is superior to all others, not just in specific ways, but in general. And it was often the case that one group would refer to another as subhuman. It was so bad that in the 16th century, Catholic missionaries to the New World held a debate where one man argued that Native Americans were fully human. His four opponents, also in the Catholic clergy, argued that these tribes were soulless, thoughtless, talking animals in human guise. To be fair, it wasn't just the devoutly religious. In the 18th century, this problem was rampant among scientists and secularists too, including David Hume, Voltaire, and the naturalist George Buffon, who said that when white people moved to the tropics, they would degenerate into dark-skinned people. Buffon also said that there were 6 different species of human alive in his time. It was in this century, 100 years before Darwin, that the famous scientist Carolus Linnaeus classified humans into 6 different species: European white people, American red people, Asian yellow people, and African black people, in addition to chimpanzees and orangutans.
Yeah, I think this is the one I was talking about. I was confused.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So the overall point here is that even if everything they said in this video is correct, which of course is not the case, racism has been along much stronger, and Darwin and modern science rejects the concept of race.
Linnaeus was a Christian who didn't know about evolution, but he believed that humans were apes and also that apes were humans. The existence of gorillas hadn't yet been confirmed, and Linnaeus didn't know about Australian Aborigines either, but once they were discovered, the Australoid race was declared to be the lowest form of humanity, largely because they and gorillas were the same color. That's how superficial 18th century scientists were, and they weren't any better in Darwin's day either. This was the common language of both spiritualists and scientists alike from at least Plato's day, thousands of years before Darwin was born. So how was any of this his fault? In fact, in the year that Darwin was born, the children of black slaves were called objects of property and domestic animals, according to an American legal statute dated the same year as Darwin's birth. So how did Darwin's theory cause that? Abraham Lincoln was born in the same day and in the same year as Darwin, and Lincoln was extremely racist. He said that white people were generally superior and that blacks should not be voters or jurors or qualified to hold public office. He said they should be denied everything. Yet Lincoln is heralded as a great emancipator and Darwin is criticized as a racist? How is that fair? Even in the modern day, the evangelist Oral Roberts University would suspend students for interracial dating and expel them for interracial marriage. Even the Ku Klux Klan said they are exclusively creationist.
If you really read the Holy Bible, which the Klan is a very Christian organization, the Holy Bible actually separates the races.
Black people and white people are nowhere related. In my opinion, I think black people evolved from animals. And I believe that we need to be separated. Whites and blacks need to be separated.
Who decreed that?
God decreed that. Jesus decreed that.
So you think this is what a good Christian man does?
Yeah, this is our Christianity. I mean, that's just plain and simple.
So it is a bit hypocritical of Christians to criticize Darwin for being racist. Creationists have told a lot of lies about Darwin, but the worst of all of them was this. In 2001, Louisiana legislator Sharon Weston Broom submitted a bill saying that creationists believe that all men are created equal with inalienable rights.
By the way, it is also important to note that Bob Jones University, a Christian fundamentalist university in South Carolina, is also banned interracial dating for quite some time.
Including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. She said that the writings of Charles Darwin promoted the justification of racism because, she said, the core concepts of Darwinist ideology is that certain races and classes of humans are inherently superior to others. And she said that Hitler was a Darwinist who exploited these racist views. She's not the only one to say that, of course. I mean, I've heard this repeated hundreds of times over the course of my life, but it is a disgusting misrepresentation of all involved. For one thing, none of these people agreed with Darwin about anything. This is the very thing that Darwin argued against. This is what happens when religious extremists are in charge of everything. So much for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So much for Christians believing that all men were created equal. I challenged creationists many times to show me where Hitler ever promoted or accepted evolution. They pointed me to Volume 2, Chapter 4 of Mein Kampf. There, Hitler mentions evolution and talks about what brought mankind away from the animal world. That does seem like he's promoting Darwin's idea, but in that passage, Hitler specifies that he's only talking about cultural evolution. And he says that man's inventions were the ticket, not any biological process. In that same paragraph, Hitler talks about what everyone who believes in the higher evolution of living organisms must admit. And again, it sounds like he's promoting evolution, but creationists don't recognize their own arguments in Hitler's words, because Hitler is criticizing a belief he does not share, which is why he questions how it all began. Hitler did mention natural evolution, and he equated that to the strong dominating the weak, something that Darwin never said. But it is clear from the context that Hitler is not talking about evolution in a Darwinian sense. Hitler talked about cultural, political, industrial, and military evolution, and the only time he mentioned natural evolution, he obviously meant it in the same sense. For this reason, some translations use the word development instead of evolution. When Hitler mentioned organic evolution, he was talking about management of an organization. Hitler's book never mentions Darwin's name, and only once does it refer to Darwinian evolution, in Volume 1, Chapter 11. I cited this passage in a number of videos where Hitler uses the same arguments that creationists commonly do. He says he accepts only microevolution, saying that evolution can only occur within definite limits, producing only subtle variants within their kind. He said that new diversity is limited to rare and inviolable hybrids between those kinds, and he said that the emergence of new species is impossible. Hitler used all these common creationist arguments, saying things that no.
So we can be saying that Kent Hovind agrees with Hitler then, if we wanted to.
Yeah, like everybody then agrees with it. So then this is a bad argument for everybody. So
Yeah. So yeah, that's basically the nail in the coffin right there. So anyway, on to the next monstrosity, the next video. Which one do I want to do next? This is what I was looking for. Radiometric dating debunked in only 3 minutes. Oh boy. Overturning an entire scientific field in only 3 minutes.
Dating? The process that gives us the very...
1 second. Let me try this again.
Oh boy. I can't wait.
The Bible has God miraculously creating the world and everything in it in just 6 days, about 6,000 years ago. But the theory of evolution has a much different timescale, taking millions of years to go from goo to me and you by way of the zoo. Which view...
Nice Dr. Seuss reference there.
Yep. And also a nice little straw man of evolution, but I digress.
Is correct. Well, to be honest, both views require faith because no one was there.
No, both views do not require faith. Evolution is an observable fact, whereas creationism is not.
Yeah, at least we have traces of the past for evolution, whereas we don't really have a trace of anything. From...
Yeah, and we were there thousands of years ago. There were people there 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago too. Well, it says that people weren't there. That people were there 6,000 years ago, and we know that there was no flood or no emptiness of the earth that long ago, because there were cities there and stuff.
Yeah, isn't Jericho like 10,000 years old?
Yeah, I think at least right after the 10,000, 9,000. I'm not sure. It was probably built right after the Ice Age ended, give or take. Probably right when we could start building agriculture and stuff as a sustainable thing instead of the hunting and gatherings.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. So yeah, it's been Jericho has been was settled for at least the past 11,000 years. But anyway, let's continue.
Thousands or millions of years ago to observe how it all got started. But can the idea of millions of years of evolution be scientifically validated? Can we really prove?
Yes, there are plenty of ways to do so. Radiometric dating, of course, is one of them. But even aside from radiometric dating, you have thermoluminescence dating, you have distant starlight, you have the Hubble constant. So we can establish a reliable date of the Earth going back millions of years, even without relying on radiometric dating. Geologically speaking, there have been over 170 magnetic polar reversals. You simply cannot fit that into a mere 6,000 years. Simply not possible. And we also have here many other lines of evidence that points at the Earth much older than 4,300 years. But let's continue.
Prove this idea of deep time using the same observational science we use for making medicine and putting people on the moon? Validation is the process of confirming what is believed to be true by what can be observed to be true. Has this ever been done for radiometric dating, the process that gives us the very idea of long ages? Actually, long ages and radiometric dating hasn't stood up to the validation test. Radiometric dating has never been validated against the absolute known ages of rocks. Let us explain. Consider
This is false.
Are they gonna do volcanoes have bad
Yeah,
dates?
they're gonna be basically saying certain dates have been bad, therefore all radiometric dating is wrong. It's worth pointing out that we did do radiometric dating on Pompeii, the Mount Vesuvius eruption, which has been dated to pretty much the exact year of the eruption, plus or minus a few years. So radiometric dating has been done on known ages, and that's how we know it works. And that's how we know we can rely on it, and a lot of other things as well.
Consider Mount St. Helens. This volcano erupted in the 1980s, giving scientists the opportunity to date the rocks that were formed from the eruption. The results? 5 different ages, all between 350,000 and 2.8 million years old, for rocks that we know were less than 30 years old. This discrepancy happens all the time in radiometric dating studies. In fact, there has never been a radiometric dating analysis that simply produces ages that validate to the known ages of rock.
Except for the Mount St. Helens, the Mount Vesuvius eruption in the 70s, in the year 70. So, plus they're using the wrong methods for the wrong tool for the wrong method. So, the wrong tool for the wrong job.
I have this analogy for like using the wrong tools for the wrong method is like trying to measure a racetrack with a yardstick, but you've glued the yardstick to the floor, so you can't pick it up and keep on measuring it. So there's no way for like you to check the whole track. With
isn't it like with I don't know how, I'm not sure exactly how isn't like carbon dating to kind of like you can't if something is too young, you can't use a certain method of checking it.
Yeah, exactly. There are some methods that have limitations for dates. But yeah, overall, it's the wrong tool for the wrong job. It's like using a truck weight to measure the weight of an atom. Of course, you're going to get the wrong weight. So, yeah.
And if radiometric dating doesn't work for rocks of known ages, why do we trust it for rocks of unknown ages? So the next time.
All right. So we have how can we trust it? So there's different ways we can cross-check with different methodologies. We can cross-check using isochron dating, which will tell us if the sample is contaminated or not. So many different ways we can cross-check and cross-verify. So, yeah.
Time you hear millions of years ago this happened or that, just ask, how do you know that for sure? And if radiometric dating is the answer given, just ask, are you aware of a study where the radiometric age of a rock agreed with the known age of the rock? And you'll find the answer will undoubtedly be no. God wrote with his own hand that he created the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them in just 6 ordinary days. The genealogies in Genesis lead us straight back to Adam, just about 6,000 years ago. Have you ever noticed how hard the world pushes the idea of millions of years? Books, movies, museums, schools, it's everywhere. But does any of this even matter? Well, consider this. Many people will only consider the Bible's message if they believe the Bible to be credible, both historically and scientifically. Each person's eternity, either in heaven or hell, depends on what they believe about the risen Christ.
So I also want to kind of point out that, kind of losing my train of thought here. Oh God, what was I going to say? It'll come back to me in a few minutes. The oil industry, billions of dollars oil industry, depends on the reliability of radiometric dating. They use radiometric dating for basin modeling, and if it wasn't reliable, then many of the oil companies will go completely bankrupt. Zion Oil famously tried to try to find oil without radiometric dating, and of course they failed miserably.
Yeah, and also they said Christians must do this. Like I know a lot of Christians that don't believe in the first 11 chapters of the Bible, but still believe the rest of it.
Yeah.
Or they can take it metaphorically, But like with the oil companies, they're about 1 or 2 bad digs away from just completely going out of business. There's a lot of money involved just trying to get one bore into the ground, and if it misses, that's pretty bad for them.
Yeah, exactly. And if the rock is too young, it won't have oil, and if it's too old, you got to have the right dates. I'm just trying to find a couple of sources here. Yeah, so if radiometric dating was foundationally flawed, then oil companies would be out of business.
Oh, and I think a lot of times I don't do it anymore, but I think they combine all the different datings as one dating, like carbon dating or radiometric dating. I they're like, oh, it's all the same thing.
Yeah.
And they try to carbon date like a dinosaur, like carbon date this, please.
Yeah. All right, let's continue.
And how do we know about this? Well, it's in the Bible. And if people don't believe the Bible got it right on the first page, who's going to trust the rest? So, because it takes faith to believe in either the Bible or the world's view of this distant past, is it a better choice to trust God or a fallible man? Download the Genesis Apologetics mobile app here for more videos on this topic and others.
There's an app for that now, apparently.
Yep. Oh boy. Let's continue. 39 biblical truths. I'm just going through here and see what piques my interest. Noah's flood in Pangea.
That's interesting. I don't interesting. Pangea. What's their opinion on that?
Can the Bible be trusted? Does radiometric dating disprove the Bible? Let's see here. Flood. Let's see here. Yeah, I think we could look at some of their flood stuff. I think that'll be fun. Playlist. That was fun. Yeah. There we go. So, a couple of short 5 to 20-minute videos we could look at.
Sweet.
Have you ever wondered how the massive dinosaur kill zone in the middle of America happened? We're talking about 3 countries, 14 states, and a stretch over 1,800 miles long and 1,000 miles wide. Over 1 million square miles are filled with the remnants of most known dinosaur species, and they're all mixed with other land animals, fish, birds, and all sorts of sea life.
Wow, I wonder
what that area is.
Yeah, would have to be where that we had a big sea there in the past, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's easy for animals to die in a so-called flood when there actually was a area to flood back then.
But also, the rest of the continent is got glaciated heavily, so we don't have as much fossils for the data to show the rest of the country. So.
Yep. Let's see here.
Yeah, when you you have an example of something, at least know where your example is at.
Yeah.
Over 1,000 miles away from the heart of this disaster zone is why millions of dinosaurs are buried in mud and ash. But that doesn't make sense because the billions of fossils in this area were buried in multiple mud and ash layers from successive watery events. There's also vast areas of crumpled and buckled geology from land masses that were laid down wet and then folded. And this action was obviously driven by rapidly subducting plates. Evolutionists explain how oceanic plates, like the Farallon plate, slowly subducted over tens of millions of years under the North American continent uneventfully, while the millions of dinosaurs now buried in this kill zone somehow just kept living and thriving. Both secular and creation scientists agree that the Farallon plate subducted under North America, even carrying massive volcanic plateaus like the conjugate Shatsky Rise along with it, going from the west to the east. But we disagree, and with good reason, that the dinosaurs somehow just kept peacefully thriving in this area while this was happening. This subducting action would be
maybe because it doesn't happen like immediately. This stuff happens very slowly. Sometimes earthquakes happen, whatever, but it's not like, oh, sudden event happened, they're all dead now. And in these 10 million years, it's like what they're talking about.
Cooked pancake, creating massive folding and buckling just like we see all over North America today. The process even explains the rapid and catastrophic formation of the Rocky Mountains. This happened just thousands of years ago during Noah's flood, when the fountains of the Great Deep were broken apart and the year-long process of the worldwide flood unfolded. Massive oceanic rifting on a worldwide scale created new seafloor that was pulled under the continents, creating cycles of tsunamis that occur when the seafloor binds and then releases, just like tsunamis are generated today. This explains the multiple layers these creatures are found in as they were buried by the ever-increasing flood waters and tsunamis. These dinosaurs were buried furiously, with over 90% of them now found disarticulated or torn apart. Many of them are even found choking on mud as they died, with their necks arched backwards. Widespread volcanism that occurred during this process also shows this happened quickly, over a year, and not millions of years. With no volcanoes in the Morrison Formation itself, where the bulk of these dead dinosaurs are found, logic demands that the huge volume of volcanic ash in the Morrison Formation to have been erupted from megavolcanoes on the west coast, lofted and carried far to the east by wind.
Yeah,
the Morrison Formation.
Or fast. Again, no one's saying it would take millions of years to die.
Yeah, exactly. And how could anything have survived catastrophic plate tectonics and colossal how should I word this, massive volcano eruptions all occurring at the same time? None of the marine organisms would have survived, and Noah's Ark would have been completely annihilated.
That allows
would have been annihilated from the volcanic eruptions.
Formation's brushy basin member alone spans 5 states and includes over 4,000 cubic miles of volcanic material. That's enough to cover the state of New Jersey in ash 740 meters deep. And there are plain indicators that this happened rapidly, not over millions of years. How else can we explain this recently discovered massive dinosaur graveyard where 10,000 adult Maiasaura were found buried in mud without a single young mixed in with the entire herd that was buried? Every single dinosaur in the area was at least 9 feet long. It sounds like the adult dinosaurs were stampeding away from the imminent danger of raging floodwaters. Their young could not keep up and became engulfed in some lower part of the peninsula. These evidences sure point to the rapid and widespread catastrophe of the flood. But do you know what seems even more convincing? Soft tissue found in dinosaur bones. Over the last few decades,
that was only I thought it was a more recent thing than that.
Yeah, so the dinosaur false tissue is, of course, a blatant misrepresentation of Dr. Mary Schweitzer's work. Dr. Mary Schweitzer herself is a Christian and an old earth creationist and theistic evolution She has repeatedly repudiated people like Kansas and Genesis and young Earth creationists, and basically has came out multiple times saying that they need to stop misrepresenting her work. So
yeah, I was there. Interesting note. This is a little sidetrack. She was came on a dig with us one time, and she was explaining like a certain taphonomic like condition that would allow for more of these soft tissue finds. And you have to find it more in sandstone or aerated ground rather than mudstone, because the pH levels of mudstone would just deteriorate all of this soft tissue too quickly. But if you could find it in some sandstone stuff like off of a beach, you'd be more likely to get lucky with this again. If we could get more, would be kind of interesting.
yep.
Scientists have been discovering soft tissues in dinosaur bones. We're talking about over 50 peer-reviewed secular science journals that have now reported 14 bioorganic materials found in dinosaur bones. They're finding blood cells, blood vessels, connective tissue, and even collagen, which has a maximum shelf life of just tens of thousands of years, with some stretching it out to a maximum of 900,000 years. Either way, with a maximum shelf life of less than 1 million years, what's collagen doing in dinosaur bones that are supposedly 65 million years old? Many dinosaur bones were even found unfossilized.
We were wrong about how long stuff could last.
Yeah, exactly. Gary Schweitzer. Let's see here. Science Mag.
Science does get stuff wrong sometimes, and we update our system. It's like, oh, we were wrong about that. Oh well, time. It's not like we were wrong about that. Quick, had all the evidence and bury it quick. No one will ever know.
Yeah.
It's kind of like we were like, at one point, like we could only store meat for so long because of salt, and then we got better with refrigeration. Like if we find a different way of preserving things, then we can make it last longer.
Yeah. And Mary Schweitzer herself, the young Earth creationists, treat you very badly and twist your words and manipulate your data. And that's directly from Dr. Schweitzer herself.
Places like Madagascar, Alaska, and Montana. Even the founder of the largest dinosaur museum in the world admitted that usually most of the original bone is still present in a dinosaur fossil. Just look at this soft, pliable dinosaur tissue. This type of bioorganic material has been found in the bones of several different dinosaur species. It sure doesn't look like a 65 million year old rock, does it? When you step back and look at all this evidence, doesn't it look like the catastrophic worldwide flood described in the Bible that happened just thousands of years ago make better sense of this evidence? Looking for answers about what the Bible teaches about creation, the fossil record?
Okay, and the NCSE, the National Center for Science Education, actually put out a couple of really good stuff about these so-called fossil graveyards, and I'm trying to find it. Fossil graveyards. Here we go. Here's from the NCSE. The Agate Springs and White River graveyards were formed by flooding rivers. The rivers of the Black Hills dumped and buried the White River bones at the base of the hill, because there the torrents slowed down upon hitting the Great Plains. Also, if Noah's flood were literal history, we would expect fossil graveyards to consist of a mixture of all kinds of animals, but the Agate Spring bones does not. It contains mostly bones from extinct small rhinoceroses called Diceratherium. There are few animals of other species. Evidently, a river simply overflooded, overwhelmed a herd of small rhinoceroses.
Yes. So basically, they're saying, not them, but saying, so since rivers flood and lakes flood, then the whole earth flooded.
Yeah.
Simple. Case closed.
Yeah, and one other thing that I'm trying to find. There's this graveyard. Here. I'll find it in a little bit. Let's see here. I think I spoke about this with Dapper Dino on my stream. See if I can find it. Here we go.
You should try to get him on.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, here it is. I did a stream with Dapper Dino a couple months ago, and this was one of the topics that we kind of went over. So I'm going to stop sharing this and play a little bit of what Dapper Dino stated.
Before that, I have to go, but it's been a complete pleasure. Thank you guys for inviting me. I didn't expect this at all. So
yeah, well,
nice meeting you.
Nice meeting you. You're always welcome on my channel. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you guys.
Yeah. So, how exactly do dinosaurs fossilize? What is the fossilization process?
So it actually varies. The big thing with fossilization is that you need to have the body in a situation where decay is going to be either extensively prolonged or stopped, essentially. So there's a few ways that this can happen. One is if it's relatively rapidly buried. So for instance, one famous fossil is the fighting dinosaurs, which has a velociraptor and a protoceratops fighting preserved in combat. The protoceratops has its beak around the raptor's arm, and the raptor has its claw up towards the protoceratops's neck. And they were buried in a landslide. So they were, Mongolia, as now, at the time in the late Cretaceous, was mostly a sandy desert. And so something happened that resulted in sand from a dune toppling onto them, suffocating them, and also just trapping them. And so because they were immediately covered by a large amount of sediment, while the flesh surely decayed, bones take a lot longer time to decay. And in fact, they can decay more slowly than sandstone can lithify. And so they are found in what's called aeolian sandstone, which means it's wind deposited sandstone. Most sedimentary rocks are deposited by water, but some are actually deposited by wind, and it's called aeolian. And so they're in aeolian sandstone, locked there. But other things that can happen can be things like a flood can come through, or one thing that actually results in really, really pristine, exquisite fossils is actually animals that fall into lakes that have anoxic bottoms. So if you sink to the bottom of an anoxic lake, very few things can survive where there's low oxygen. That's basically all that's there are anaerobic bacteria. And they will slowly decay the creature, but it's very, very slowly. And if that lake is actively having sediment deposited onto it, the deposition, even if it's relatively slow, might still be slow enough to cover the body before it completely decays. Now, after you have the creature, whatever it is, I keep saying animal, but I mean it works for plants too. After you have whatever creature it is covered in sediment, the sediment has to lithify. So lithification is the process of taking loose sediment and turning it into actual rock. There's a few different ways this happens, but generally speaking, what happens is some chemical that's naturally occurring, and it varies based on which kind of rock you're talking about, seeps between the grains and cements them together as a kind of like a glue. And once this happens, the fossil is essentially trapped in there, and even if it were decaying up to this point, at this point, it's probably not going to keep decaying. And another thing that can happen, but doesn't actually have to happen, but it often does, is that some of these minerals can then actually seep through microscopic fissures in the bone and actually start to fill in what was the empty space in the bone. And also, sometimes they'll actually start to seep and replace the actual calcium carbonate of the bone so that it actually itself starts to turn to rock after a while. But that does not actually always happen. There are plenty of fossils out there where the original, because you gotta remember, the calcium carbonate of your bone is basically just a rock, right? I mean, that's what it is. So the actual hard part of the bone, I mean, it weathers away, but it doesn't really rot in the same way as other things do, because it's not really digestible. Like, you can't really get energy from it. So, so by the end of this process, you have a bone that's been trapped in rock. It might be infilled by rock, and in many cases, the actual chemistry of the bone itself has been replaced by minerals from the surrounding area that will seep into it.
I gotta say, I got it going myself too.
Well,
I'm sorry, I missed some of that. There was a lot of weird microphone.
I'm sorry. I said I really enjoyed this discussion, and I hope you did as well. All right. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, I love to stay for more, but work calls. I gotta give people their Big Macs. Before I go, I just want to say, thanks for letting me be on here. Self-advertise real fast. This Tuesday, I'm gonna have Jackson Walker from Just a Walking Fist on my channel, and we're gonna talk about the different animals that decided to go back to the ocean, from ichthyosaurs to plesiosaurs to manatees to whales to seals, and how that all happened. I put the link in the private chat. You want to share for everybody for the live stream?
Yeah, sure. I'll do just that.
Good luck. I hope you get some other guests in the future.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. And feel free to come on in. I am going to put a link to the StreamYard for anyone who wants to come in and chats. Links to Tuesday's show. Here is a link to the StreamYard for those who want to join. I am going to just kind of open up the room a little bit, just so we can get a little bit of a variety of people in here. So, yeah. Catastrophic plate tectonics. This is the next video. This is a 23-minute long video. So, Chrome tab. Don't forget to share audio. Sharing audio.
To some, the idea of Noah's flood conjures up images from Sunday school Bible stories of a small boat overstuffed with cute animals that gently bobbed in an ocean for 40 days. Many simply call it a myth. Fewer and fewer these days believe the flood account from Genesis 6 to 9 is actual history. The Bible frames the flood as an actual historical event, one that involved a specific family of 8. Genesis says the flood lasted for a full year, engulfed the entire world, and preserved animals, plants, and humanity from well-deserved judgment. The flood represents the most detailed account of any single event in the Bible. Both the Apostle Peter and Jesus even referred to the Genesis flood as a real historical event. So it's safe to say that the credibility of the Bible, and even Jesus himself, hinges on whether the flood account actually happened as described in Genesis. Join us now as we reveal how Noah's flood lines up with brand new scientific research. Over 1,800 oil well boreholes from 4 continents have all been compiled and mapped. The newly emerging map tracks the thickness and extent of each rock type as they were laid down by the flood. This research reveals the same 6 megasequences of sedimentary rock layers across multiple continents. Each megasequence contains a huge stack of rock layers, often with coarse-grained sandstone on the bottom, then finer-grained deposits like shale, then topped by limestones. Each megasequence is bounded above and below by flat, eroded surfaces called unconformities. A few places on Earth have layers that represent all 6 megasequences. How did they get there? What do they say about Noah's flood? Catastrophically water-deposited sedimentary layers top most of the world's continents. Would Noah's flood bring lots of water and lots of mud? Geologists agree on the 6 megasequences, but they differ on the timescale in which they happened. If they took millions of years, then they have little to do with the flood. But if they were all deposited rapidly and recently, then the flood should come to mind. Many also question when a larger landmass, such as a Rodinia-like supercontinent, broke into continents that moved to their current configuration. For the first time ever, new megasequence maps allow us to see how the flood shaped our entire planet, just like the Bible said, including reconfiguring the continents. According to Genesis, the Garden of Eden was a lush paradise, one that was set up for eternal life, worldwide vegetarianism, and harmony with our Creator. There was no bloodshed, disease, or even animal death. Plants and trees had no thorns or thistles, and humans tended God's creation. Then
Objection. Assertion without any evidence. And let's just think for a few minutes. What on earth would the marine organisms be eating? would they have been eating some vegetation or whatever? Certainly, plants. There must have been some type of plant death or cellular death before the fall. So let's continue.
Came the fall. We disobeyed God and ate the forbidden fruit. Sin entered the world, and death through sin. Suffering, pain, mutations, and cancer now plagued humanity. Plants and trees grew thorns, and we transitioned from keepers of a lush garden to laboring farmers. The earth and universe began to decay and groan under the weight of sin's curse. Not even 2,000 years later, humanity had turned so corrupt that God sent the flood as a judgment against us. For God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And God said to Noah, "The end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth." God instructed Noah to make an ark, a word that means box or chest, to specific dimensions, materials, and construction. And Noah did according unto all that the Lord commanded him. And Noah and his family entered the ark along with 2 of every basic kind of land-dwelling, air-breathing animal with nostrils. These add up to at least 1 pair from each of about 2,000 animal kinds needed to reproduce all the variety in animal life we have today. Then, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. These 2 events, the fountains of the great deep breaking up and the windows of heaven opening, began the first day of a 371-day-long calamity.
All right, so let's just think about some of the physical and heat issues associated with such an event. Obviously, this event of the breakup of the continents would have produced an enormous amount of energy and an enormous amount of heat. I think the NCSE did a calculation where all this catastrophic plate tectonics and all this movement would have generated over 8 octillion joules of energy. How much energy is created in an earthquake? Just to give you an idea of what we are talking about. A magnitude 9 earthquake is equivalent to about 500 megatons of TNT. And you want to create a situation where the Earth's continents are breaking up at supersonic speeds to get to where they are now. You're going to create a significant amount of heat and energy through that. And this would be enough just by itself to pretty much vaporize the entire Earth. None of the marine organisms could possibly survive such an event.
That resurfaced the Earth and killed everything that moved on land. Hot magma mixed with steam pierced the Earth's crust.
So that would have created even more heat and would pretty much boil every single marine organism alive.
Giant rifts or tears ran thousands of miles across the planet. Scalding hot magma vaporized massive amounts of water that jetted into the atmosphere. The water fell back to Earth as intense global rain, along with torrential rain from heaven for 40 days. Worldwide catastrophic rifting caused massive mud-filled tsunamis to speed across deep ocean floors, then onto shallow ocean floors, killing everything in their path. The first mega-sequence wipes out mostly shallow marine habitats. The bursting fountains of the great deep spew out megatons of magma and carbon dioxide. Sure enough, the first mega-sequence rocks show a spike in volcanic activity and massive amounts of carbon dioxide. During these first 40 days, intense water currents overtopped most of the flooded continents. Water-laden sediment travels at highway speeds. Thick sediment blankets start covering low regions of the continent. Fossils show that the first 3 mega-sequences buried the shallow seas that were filled with marine life, as these deposits have almost no trees or land animals. All 3 mega-sequences covered similar environments across North and South America and Africa, the 3 continents mapped so far. One global cause, Noah's flood, best explains this one worldwide effect. Then by the 40th day of the flood, the Absorica mega-sequence began hitting. The maps show that this is when things got much worse. Something shoves the water over the tops of even the high lands from that ancient world. The newly forming ocean floor offshore is so hot that it starts very thick, pushing up the ocean waters from beneath.
Again, this would have created even more heat, more energy. Nothing would have survived that. The marine organisms would have been destroyed, would have been pretty much vaporized alive in an instant. So yeah, nothing could possibly survive that. And with all that heat and energy, how is it possible for a wooden boat to survive such great catastrophic events such as this?
Sea level rises dramatically. Molten magma rises and fills the widening gaps, pushing the mid-ocean ridges wider. The distant colder ocean floor shoves against the continents, then slides beneath them like giant conveyor belts, deep beneath the earth in some places. Rather than the conventional model that has the seafloors spreading slowly, this runaway subduction actually happened quickly, moving at about 5 miles per hour, due to the heat caused by the friction and...
So if I'm understanding them correctly, the continents were breaking apart at 5 miles an hour. Hold on, I need to rewind that.
quickly, moving at about 5 miles per hour. Places. Rather than the conventional model that has the seafloors spreading slowly, this runaway subduction actually happened quickly, moving at about 5 miles.
Okay, boy, let's just see how bad this is. So this is happening 5 miles an hour, and in a 24-hour period, this would have been 120 miles per day. Multiply that in a 150-day period, you would be getting, it would have moved about 18,000 miles. Simply put, this is not possible. Again, this would have been far, 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 far greater than a magnitude 9 earthquake, which creates about 500 megatons of TNT. So multiply that by an order of magnitude in order to get where we need. You would pretty much vaporize the entire Earth millions of times over.
Per hour, due to the heat caused by the friction and pressure of the rapidly subducting plates. As the diving ocean floor plates subduct under the land, they push down the continental edges and release them, creating tsunami cycles that blanket the continents. Just how tsunamis happen today, only more intense and frequent. For example, the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in Japan, and the 4th largest in history, was a magnitude 9.1 earthquake that occurred in 2011. This earthquake was caused by an undersea megathrust about 45 miles east of the Japanese coast. At the center, there was a 160-foot slip between the overriding plate that was part of Japan and the underlying Pacific plate. The sea bottom rose about 23 feet when the fault unlocked, and the resulting earthquake triggered a devastating tsunami that was 133 feet above sea level and traveled inland for 6 miles.
Yeah, and you would need hundreds of times the amount of energy to move the continents at 5 miles an hour during this global flood. Simply put, this is not possible. Again, you would pretty much be vaporizing the planet dozens and dozens of times over.
The tsunamis occurring during the flood, however, were different, much different. With the ocean ridge bursting open rapidly and pushing the ocean floor under land continents on a worldwide scale, tsunamis were happening in cycles, several every hour, and with long stretches of subduction zones active at the same time. The incoming phase of a tsunami has a much higher speed and is highly turbulent, which keeps the sediment in suspension, but it leaves.
So with all these tsunamis vaporizing the planet and happening every single hour, how on earth is the Ark surviving all of these tsunamis? They would have gotten seasick pretty quickly. Again, this is simply not possible.
Behind layers of sediment as it slows down in the retreating phase. This cycle repeats several times every hour during the 150-day inundation stage of the flood, first entombing the shallow marine life, followed by land creatures in different habitats and elevations, leaving behind what we see today in the fossil record. These types of tsunamis.
Objection: assertion without evidence. So, again, why didn't a human get buried in the Jurassic, or how is it possible that we haven't found a single rabbit in the Precambrian? That's the type of stuff we would expect under the global flood, with organisms completely mixed together, but that's not what we see. We do see nice layers that conform perfectly to what the theory of evolution predicts.
Have even occurred in recent history, such as the tsunami caused by slipping ocean plates that hit the coast of Washington in 1700 and left behind multiple layers representing each wave of the tsunami. Recent seismic technology actually allows us to investigate whether this type of rapid subduction occurred. Sure enough, these scans reveal a ring of unexpectedly cold rock at the bottom of the mantle, beneath the subduction zones that surround the Pacific Ocean. The severity and elevation of this stage of the flood is why the first land creatures and plants start showing up in the fossil record laid down by the Absaroka megasequence. Entire ecosystems are buried in enormous deposits that later turn into coal, such as the extensive Appalachian coal beds. In fact, the U.S. has over 7 trillion tons of coal reserves. Where did it all come from? While we know that coal is formed by dead plant material being sandwiched between sediment layers, we only have enough vegetation on the Earth's surface today to produce just a fraction of the existing coal reserves. This shows that the pre-flood world was mostly covered by lush vegetation. The rising floodwaters and tsunamis that were necessary to sweep over the land and bury vast amounts of vegetation that turned into coal are best explained by a catastrophe of worldwide proportions. The fact that over a dozen states in the U.S. are filled with dinosaur fossils buried under heaps of mud also attests to the flood. In fact, geologists have found what was a temporarily exposed dinosaur peninsula where the dinosaurs made their last stand, now buried there along with lake and sea life transported by the massive waves. The earlier flood deposits, the first 3 megasequences, do not seem to have deposited much material over this dinosaur peninsula. Only a few hundred yards of sediment remain along the margins, and in many places, no trace of deposition is left at all. Deposits thousands of feet thick occur east and west of this temporarily exposed peninsula that extends from Minnesota to New Mexico. Now buried across it are pre-flood wetland plants and animals, including dinosaurs, turtles, frogs, fish, and many birds. Thousands of dinosaur trackways up and down this peninsula, plus similar temporarily exposed low areas on other continents, suggest that dying dinosaurs and other hardy track makers floated, waded, and walked on freshly deposited mud, trying to find safe ground. Next, the massive Zuni megasequence hits. The Absaroka and Zuni megasequences are the most severe because the continental plate.
I actually do want to take a quick moment to address the fossil footprints of the dinosaurs. These fossil footprints 100% prove that the global flood did not and could not have happened. Fossil footprints do not form in the global flood. Fossil footprints, how do they form? I'm just going to Google this real quick. So basically, here's the process of how a fossil footprint would form. So fossil footprints happen when animals step into a moist surface, such as a mud or sand or shoreline. The sediment eventually dries, and once it is dry, it is more resistant to effects of wind. And then a new layer of sediment buries that hardened mud or sand, preserving the footprints. A global flood would have, any type of flooding activity would have completely annihilated the footprints, and it simply would not have had enough time to form. Of course, in the cyborg chat right there.
Began to move more quickly from the mid-flood transitory Pangea-like supercontinent configuration to where they are today, with oceanic rifting and plate subduction increasing dramatically and the continents traveling apart quickly. The tsunami-like waves began washing across western North America, while virtually no sedimentation is occurring in the east. When coming up over the Dinosaur Peninsula, the Zuni catastrophically buries dinosaurs in the Morrison Formation, a 13-state area encompassing over 700,000 square miles. This Jurassic unit includes at least 141 massive dinosaur boneyards where dinosaurs like Camarasaurus, Diplodocus, Apatosaurus, Stegosaurus, and Allosaurus are found. The Cretaceous layers, like the Hell Creek Formation, are found on top of the Jurassic and hold hundreds of mass boneyards containing several different types of dinosaurs, such as T-Rex, Triceratops, Centrosaurus, and Edmontosaurus that had been living in a different ecosystem, also buried by the Zuni. The Zuni was so massive and fast that it engulfed entire regions with mud flows, burying giant creatures like this T-Rex under 50 feet of muddy sediment, entombed so quickly that preserved blood cells, blood vessels, and bone cells were found just recently. How much water does it take to pile 50 feet of mud on top of a dinosaur? The Dinosaur National Monument in Utah contains thousands of visible bones from 11 kinds of dinosaurs that were buried in a jumbled mass in the Morrison Formation, together with crocodiles, turtles, lizards, frogs, and clams. What type of event would it take to bury all these different land animals with millions of clams? When the Dinosaur Peninsula flooded over completely, large herds of dinosaurs were entombed in massive fossil graveyards in the Upper Cretaceous system found in northern Wyoming, Montana, and Alberta, Canada. The dinosaurs had tried to escape by fleeing northward up the peninsula as waters advanced from the south. This explains this massive graveyard in northern Montana that's over 1.2 miles long and contains 30 million fossil fragments, representing over 10,000 adult Maiasaura that were simultaneously buried. In this entire collection of bones, not a single baby was found. Every one of these 10,000 Maiasaura was between 9 and 23 feet long. Does this seem like the adult dinosaurs were stampeding away from the raging floodwaters, with 100% of their young falling behind and being engulfed in a different part of the peninsula? Just 170 miles northeast of this location is one of the largest dinosaur graveyards in the world, one that even secular scientists admit was caused by a watery catastrophe. Here, thousands of centrosaurs are buried in 14 mega bone beds over an entire square mile, which is nearly 500 football fields. Looks like a massive herd of these creatures, thousands of them, were simultaneously buried in mud by Noah's flood. Just 45 miles west from this location is yet another massive flood deposit, and this one even has 49 different species of dinosaurs buried along with turtles, crocodiles, fish, flying reptiles, birds, and small mammals. What type of disaster could bury 49 species of dinosaurs and many other types of animals, including marine life, together in mass graves? These mass burial sites are common in the US as well. For example, look at this dinosaur dig site in Wyoming, where a 1 meter thick layer of mudstone stretches for 80 acres, with over 1 million bones buried in a graded, sorted bed, where big bones are found at the bottom and little bones on top. The only way to develop a graded bed like this is by a catastrophic process that transports these bones and deposits them during a single event. Large flying creatures like pterosaurs were able to fly to escape the rising floodwaters, delaying their demise until the later.
All right, so what would be a more probable cause? A global flood that would have vaporized the Earth, or localized flooding? This seems, without looking everything up, this seems to be more of a localized event and would certainly not explain a large catastrophic event. Yeah, let's continue.
Stages of the flood. The fossil record shows they are buried in many different layers all over the world. There's no doubt that widespread volcanism was also involved in finishing off the dinosaurs, as many of these mass graves are literally packed with volcanic ash. Ash that in many cases was mixed with water when it emplaced the dinosaurs in their tombs. One section of the Morrison Formation, called the Brushy Basin Member, spreads across 5 states and includes over 4,000 cubic miles of volcanic materials. Without a single volcano in the Morrison Formation area, geologists believe this material had to be carried all the way from volcanoes on the west coast, volcanoes created by the magma rising from the subducting ocean crust plunging under the land. Today, these subduction zones form the Ring of Fire, responsible for over 90% of our earthquakes. The Bible records that on the 150th day of the flood, God made a wind to pass over the earth. The waters started to recede. The fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained. After the water peaked over the top of the highest remnant of the pre-flood world, it began to rush off the continents, eroding and reworking some of the deposits laid down in the previous megasequences, especially carving away at the Zuni deposits. This final phase appears to have been different than the others because there was a reversal in flow direction as the waters began to sheet off the continents. This flow reversal transported much of the fossils deposited earlier off the highest uplands, spreading them towards the edges of the continent. The evidence points to the floodwaters draining southward off of the U.S. towards the Gulf of Mexico, with a sheet wash pattern all at once. This is why we find massive sand deposits in the deep water of the Gulf of Mexico. Billions of barrels of oil have been discovered there, with much of it found within a massive 1,100-foot thick bed of pure sand in over 7,000 feet of water, over 200 miles offshore. In addition, as the flood ended, plants swept off the pre-flood lands formed massive coal beds, such as in the Powder River Basin of Wyoming and Montana. These layers contain the largest coal deposits in North America that currently supplies over 40% of the coal in the U.S. Some of these stacked coal beds are up to 200 feet thick and cover areas that are 60 miles long by 60 miles wide. The sheer volume of plant material required to form such a massive layer of coal testifies to catastrophic circumstances. The massive runoff that began with the retreating floodwaters may also explain the lack of human fossils in the rock record. Any residual human remains left buried in earlier deposits were totally destroyed by the erosive, retreating floodwaters. In line with God's promise to wipe them from the face of the earth, any residual remains were ground up and likely spread in all directions over great distances in the Tejas megasequence, lessening the likelihood of finding any human fossil remains. Because humans were impacted earlier by the flood's violence, they were destroyed and thus not buried whole deep in the sediments, leaving no fossil traces. Later erosion in the Tejas sequence would have affected the strata beneath, wiping away even traces of human remains buried in earlier layers. When God stopped the fountains of the Great Deep on day 150, the new ocean surface began cooling and sinking, allowing the floodwaters to lower as they sheeted off the continents into the new ocean basins. Psalm 104 describes the mountains being raised at the end of the flood, and the waters draining down valleys and off the emerging new land surfaces. The seafloor rifting process and the resulting mountain forming process explains why sea creatures are found on mountaintops all over the world, high above current sea levels. For the remaining 220 days of the flood, the water...
All right, so I wanted to address the fossil sea creatures on top of mountains. This is explained by simple uplift of the continents and simple uplift of the mountains. A good example would be the Himalaya mountains, which, as we know, are formed by the collision of the Himalaya mountains. The Himalaya mountains are formed by the continental collision of the India plate and the Asian plates, and so obviously these fossil sea creatures were simply uplifted over time.
Recedes from the earth and it dries out, allowing time for Earth to be replenished with vegetation for the animals to eat when they eventually come off the Ark. This year-long catastrophe...
No, plants would not have survived being buried underneath the a global flood. They simply would not have been. They simply would not have survived being buried for 150 days under massive amounts of water. And if you don't believe me, just do the experiment yourself. Take a couple plants, bury them underneath water, and see how long you live. They're not going to live very long.
Left behind a vast number of proofs that, quite frankly, make its occurrence obvious. First, we have the staggering volume of fossil-bearing sedimentary rocks around the world. Over 1 mile thick on average, billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by water all over the earth. And the sediments they're found in lie above sea level. What sort of water process could emplace so much sediment above sea level on top of the land surface? Another clue is the vast horizontal extent of individual sediment layers with little to no erosional channeling between successive layers. What sort of transport and depositional process could conceivably generate such uniform layers over such vast horizontal distances? Many of these layered beds are separated by bedding planes on the scale of inches to feet apart, a feature so common that few stop to think about how it happened. It's as if the sediment is being deposited in pulses in a repeating manner, with each pulse producing a thin layer commonly found around the world. The flood tsunamis provide a perfect explanation, and it happened so quickly that there was no time between deposition of the layers for surviving critters to burrow into the layers and churn them over. What has been discovered, both from a creationist as well as from a secular understanding, is that much of the continental fossil record was already in place before any of the present-day ocean crust had come into existence at a rift zone. For example, all of the trilobite fossils had been deposited, plus all of the older coal deposits had already been formed before any of the present-day ocean crust had formed. Since in creationist understanding, the presence of fossils is a completely trustworthy indicator of the action of the flood, this means that much of the flood cataclysm had already unfolded and had generated fossil-bearing sediments on the continental surface before any of the present-day ocean floor had appeared. It further implies that all of today's ocean floor formed since the onset of the flood, during roughly the latter half of the cataclysm. It also means that all of the pre-flood ocean floor, plus the ocean floor formed during the earlier portion of the flood, must have been recycled into the Earth's interior during the cataclysm.
Again, that would have been creating an enormous amount of heat, enormous amount of energy, and would have created catastrophic conditions that would have been sufficient to vaporize the planet, none of which is physically possible. Until they have an explanation of where all that heat and energy went and how marine organisms could have survived and not have been boiled alive at an instant, and they really need to work that out on their model.
These considerations indicate in a compelling way that rapid plate tectonics must have been a major aspect of the year-long flood catastrophe. This 6-megasequence worldwide flooding process perfectly set the stage for the subsequent ice age. The oceans had been tremendously heated by the rifting that had taken place along the 45,000-mile ridge system and the creation of a completely new seafloor from hot lava as a consequence. This caused an abnormal amount of evaporation and thus continuous rain that was likely worldwide. The volcanic activity created by the subduction zones that created the Ring of Fire would have spewed volumes of ash and aerosols high into the atmosphere, resulting in cooling over the continents, especially in the higher latitudes. These factors combined to produce an ice age that lasted a few hundred years, but ended as the conditions that caused it.
Again, objection. No evidence being provided here. There is evidence of multiple ice ages in the past, and there's been evidence of that the last glacial period lasted much longer than a few hundred years. And again, there's no historical record of a recent global ice age. It's simply not there.
Waned. The Ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat in the 7th month on the 17th day of the month. Just as Noah and his family entered through the single door of the Ark to be saved from the flood, there's only one way of salvation today. Jesus Christ in the book of John says, "I am the door. By me, if any man enter in, he shall be saved." Through his death and resurrection, Christ paid the penalty for our sins, offering salvation to those who will receive him. With so much evidence supporting the historical foundation of the Christian faith, we pray that you will consider following Christ as the only way for salvation. As many as received him, to them gave he power to become children of God, even to them that believe on his name, which were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. John 1:12-13.
Are you a Christian student looking for answers about what the Bible teaches about creation?
All right, so we've been going for almost 2 hours, so I am going to take a little bit of an intermission. This will be a good time for you guys to stretch your legs and something to drink, and hopefully join the StreamYard. Be right back. All right, we are back from intermission. Welcome back, everyone. We are doing a marathon debunking of some of the Genesis Apologetics videos in response to yet another false copyright strike against Dapper Dino. So let's continue with the next video in the Flood installment. Noah's Myth, History or Myth.
Myth number 5.
Debunking the 7 myths that deny the mythical truth series. Let's see how bad this video is.
Is the Bible's account of Noah's flood is just myth and was drawn from writings from the ancient Near East. To investigate this claim, we'll look at the global evidence for a worldwide flood, the seaworthiness of the Ark, and answer tough questions like how could Noah fit all of the animals on the Ark? Finally, we'll contrast the Bible's account of the flood with the leading flood myth from the ancient Near East, the Epic of Gilgamesh. First, let's take a quick look at the evidence for the worldwide year-long flood of the Bible. The Bible records that the flood commenced by the fountains of the great deep breaking open that led to the entire globe being covered with water, with the highest hills even submerged by 20 feet. If this happened as described, it would have left some amazing scars on the earth. This is exactly what we find with the 40,000-mile oceanic rift system that covers the Earth 1.9 times over, including the massive 10,000-mile mid-Atlantic ridge that quite obviously shows how these continents were once joined together and then pushed apart. Just check out this map with all the ocean water removed. The deep continental shelves become visible, and we can see how the continents fit together like puzzle pieces to shape an Earth that used to be mostly a single landmass. This is especially obvious when looking at the matching jagged edges of lower South America and Africa. We can also see this notch of submerged land off the Grand Banks of Newfoundland and how it perfectly fits into a slot north of Spain. These continents fit together so well because of the catastrophic linear rifting that occurred when the fountains of the Great Deep were pulled apart. The Hebrew term used for this is ba-ka, which means to cleave, rend, or break and rip open, to make a breach. This couldn't describe what we see any better. One of the largest tears, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, includes perpendicular faults along its entire length, showing the formation of new seafloor that occurred rapidly during the flood, not slowly over millions of years. The raised and sloped features on each side of the rift also testify to the hot and buoyant rock that still lies beneath it. This is certainly something that happened quickly in the past and then slowed down greatly, as GPS measurements today indicate. The evolutionary view holds that these continents moved apart slowly.
Good
Hello.
evening or
Hey,
afternoon.
Hey, how you doing? Good to see you. Thank you so much for joining. Feel free to introduce yourself.
I just go by many names, but if you want to call me Tanya, that's fine. You see me on Speed's channel a lot.
Yeah, I know who you are. Thank you so much for joining. Any thoughts so far on this section in the video?
I haven't been watching long, but it's just one of those things where, okay, the flood happened. Cool. Can we move on with our lives?
So they did mention the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. So I want to point out here is the Geological Society. Here is what they say about this Mid-Atlantic Ridge and how it formed. So the North American and the Eurasian plates are moving away from each other along the line of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge, like other ocean ridge systems, has developed as a consequence of the divergent motion between the Eurasian and North American and the North American and African and South African plates. This produces basalt volcanoes when an eruption occurs above the surface, and characteristics basalts and underwater eruptions. So this is the geological view on how a Mid-Atlantic Ridge system formed. And to me, this is a much more logical, plausible, and probable explanation.
I see what you did there.
you see, I had to. You see my call out of a
yeah, I know. That was well done. That was well done.
Yeah, what is the most logical, plausible, probable explanation for this feature?
I'll just say his ears are ringing right now.
Yeah, I don't know if Maddox is going to watch this or not, but
I mean, I was trying to say not to say his name, but okay.
Yep. Yeah, let's continue. Hello, Mr. Archaeopteryx. Welcome. A link to join is in this sidebar. So, Mr. Archaeopteryx, if you want to join, feel free.
Over millions of years. If this was true, the large rivers on the continents that straddle each sides of these rifts would have left a connected trail of mud stretching from one side of the Atlantic to the other. But what we see from the evidence is that they were rapidly split apart, and then the draining and erosion started. Major rivers like the Congo, Mississippi, and Amazon run off the continents and have mud fans with only thousands of years worth of mud deposits, not millions. Also, there are flat sand bottoms on each side.
So is this arguing against the flood? These videos?
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. So this is for
I was gonna say, like, it's like I'm asking you a question. Where, like, are you? Go ahead.
Okay, sure. So this is from Genesis Apologetics. I'm doing a little bit of a marathon rebuttal to some of their videos in response to yet another false copyright strike against someone, namely Dapper Dino. But yeah, that is what we are doing. This is part of their series on proving the global flood. So that is what we're responding to right now.
Anyways, I just wanted to stop
side of these continents, showing they were.
Thank you for popping on. Have a great night.
You too.
split apart rapidly. They don't have millions of years worth of runoff with extensive mud extending out into the ocean. These rivers began shaping and eroding only thousands of years ago, not millions. The fossil record that now straddles both sides of this global tear testifies to the rapid nature of this catastrophe, with millions of the same kinds of animals that were once living together now found buried in mud layers on either side. Global geology joins this testimony with recent analysis of 1,800 boreholes from around the world, revealing 6 megasequences of the flood that indicate its worldwide extent. Billions of fossils buried in the mud around the world, including 13 states of dead dinosaurs mixed with marine life in the middle of America. What type of flood could do this? Just how much water would it take to bury millions of land creatures under hundreds of feet of mud in this 13-state, 700,000 square mile area? And just how did so many land creatures get buried together with marine life, with 97% of the dinosaurs found disarticulated, and many of the remaining 3% that are found intact discovered in mud layers with their necks arched back, suffocating as they died? Catastrophic plate tectonics explains the mechanism behind the Genesis flood, with massive oceanic plates subducting under the land masses, generating cycles of tsunamis that brought megatons of sediment onto land, wiping out every living creature in their paths, burying them in the muddy layers we can still see today. These types of tsunamis still occur, although much less frequently and on a smaller scale. The spreading seafloor subducts, binds under the land masses, and then releases, creating mud-filled tsunamis that carry debris and sea life onto land, sorting them in layers. This is exactly what we see in dinosaur graveyards today around the world. North America provides some clues to the massive nature of the flood. In fact, even secular geologists refer to what's known as the widespread late Cretaceous transgression, which is just technical jargon for worldwide flood. Studies have revealed that a sea level rise of 310 meters is required to flood the Cretaceous layers based on their current elevation. However, the maximum thickness of the fossil layers produced by a 310-meter sea level rise is only about 700 meters. The challenge is that in North America, nearly 50% of the Cretaceous layers contain strata thicker than 700 meters, indicating that the continents had to sink and buckle during this global inundation. This is exactly what the catastrophic nature of the flood would have done. There's just no way that rising sea levels alone can explain the fossil record in North America. Something much more catastrophic that warped and submerged the continents just had to be involved. Next, let's investigate whether the Ark was seaworthy. God gave certain dimensions to Noah for building the Ark: 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. Using the Nipper cubit at 20.4 inches, this works out to a vessel about 510 feet long, 85 feet wide, and 51 feet high. Accounting for a 15% reduction in volume due to the hull curvature, the Ark had about 1.88 million cubic feet of space, the equivalent of 450 semi-trailers of cargo space, twice as long as a Boeing 747 and stretching over 1.5 football fields. This was a massive ship, but was such a vessel seaworthy? Interestingly, the Ark's dimensions were about the same as modern shipping vessels, making a fitting shape for handling ocean swells that are typically spaced out in such a way that ships of this size fare well at sea. In fact, Dr. Xianwan Hong, who holds a PhD in applied mechanics from the University of Michigan, conducted a study on the seaworthiness of Noah's Ark at the world-class ship research center CRISO. Dr. Hong's team compared 12 different hull designs of various proportions and found that the Ark, based on the biblical dimensions, outperformed all others because it carefully balanced the conflicting requirements for stability, resistance to capsizing, passenger stability or seakeeping, and strength. The study also confirmed that the Ark could handle waves as high as 100 feet without capsizing. Noah was instructed by God to coat the inside and the outside of the Ark with pitch, a thick, gooey substance secreted by trees as a means of protection against infection or insect attack. When heated into a liquid state and applied to ship planking, pitch hardens almost instantly into a protective, waterproof shell, very similar to how epoxy or fiberglass are used in shipbuilding today. The strong outer shell provided by hardened pitch adds both strength and waterproofing beyond the natural capability of the wood. These divine shipbuilding instructions given to Noah certainly seem to make realistic sense. Next, let's look at one of the most frequently asked questions about the Ark. How could it fit all the animals? Skeptics frequently scoff at the idea of packing all the animal species onto the ark, but the solution is found in this very objection. Noah didn't have to load all animal species on the ark. He only had to load the animal kinds. For example, there are over 300 dog breeds and over 300 horse breeds, and all breeds within these two.
All right, so I wanted to address a couple of points. Number one, the seaworthiness of the Ark. Even if it was seaworthy, for calm waters, I highly doubt that it would have been seaworthy in a catastrophic flooding of the world, especially in a flood that would have vaporized the Earth millions of times over, with tons of tsunamis happening every day and tons of volcanic eruptions. I highly doubt the Ark would have been seaworthy in that case.
Two animal kinds are interfertile, producing offspring representing a mix in between the two parents. The same is true for many other animal groups. Collapsing these animal trees results in a very feasible number of animal kinds, less than a few thousand, that could board the Ark, get off a year later, and then spread around the world and reproduce into the varieties within kinds we see today. Now let's compare the biblical flood to the leading flood myth, the Epic of Gilgamesh. In 1853, archaeologists found a series of 12 tablets dated to around 650 BC, although parts of the story existed in earlier fragmentary versions. Because the story had many of the same elements as the Genesis account, skeptics believed that Gilgamesh preceded the biblical account, negating the Genesis account as just a spin-off. Fortunately for
Well, that is also because the Epic of Gilgamesh dates before the Bible. Before the biblical account is written. So that is why the Epic of Gilgamesh is typically viewed as being prior to the biblical account, and why the biblical account seems to be ripping off of the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Christians, however, there are major clues that point to the biblical account as the accurate one, and Gilgamesh as a later work of fiction that incorporated legendary elements of a flood within a cultural fantasy. Here are the reasons why. First, we have the feasibility of the Gilgamesh version of the Ark, described as a massive, unstable cube that was about 200 feet on each side with 6 decks that divided it into 7 parts. Along with help from the community and craftsmen, he supposedly built this vessel, which was over 3 times the size of the biblical Ark, in just a week. How would something like this fare during a catastrophic worldwide flood? It would obviously tumble, killing or maiming its passengers.
And certainly, the biblical Noah's Ark would certainly have done the same thing in a catastrophic world where, excuse me, what was I saying? Yeah, certainly would have killed all the passengers on board. First, the biblical Ark, everyone would have been dead from methane poisoning in just a few days, and the Ark certainly would have been able to survive being vaporized dozens of times over.
Obviously quite different than the biblical Ark, which had a 7-to-1 length-to-width ratio, which is very similar to many of today's ocean barges, making a feasible design for staying afloat during the flood. Scripture provides clues that Noah and helpers likely had between 55 and 75 years to build the Ark. The second key for determining.
All right, so 75 years. Let's say it was 75 years to build the Ark. That means that by the time the Ark was completed, the oldest would have been rotted away and needed to be replaced. That would have been a significant problem and one of the biggest challenges in creating a wood boat in 75 years. But with that, let's continue. And again, Mr. Archaeologist, and again, kinds is the way that it isn't biblical. But more importantly than that, what exactly is a kind?
Determining which of these flood accounts is the original is the duration of the flood provided by each. The Gilgamesh flood lasted a mere 6 days, whereas the Genesis flood lasted 371 days. Both accounts claim the flood was worldwide. But how could water cover Earth in just 6 days? A floating 200 by 200 foot cube and 6 days for worldwide inundation certainly stretch credulity. The next consideration is the reasons for the flood given by each of the two accounts. In the Genesis account, God's judgment is just. He was patient with utterly wicked mankind for 120 years before sending the flood, and showed mercy to the last righteous family. In the Gilgamesh account, the flood was ordered by multiple self-centered squabbling gods that were starving without humans to feed them sacrifices. These two are quite different. Finally, there are several other parts of the Gilgamesh account that are obviously mythical, such as Gilgamesh being 2/3 divine and 1/3 mortal. After oppressing his people, Gilgamesh and others called upon the gods, and the sky god Anu creates a wild man named Enkidu to fight Gilgamesh. The battle is a draw, and they become friends. Gilgamesh apparently also encounters talking monsters and a scorpion man in his journeys. Many myths are based on historical accounts, but they get embellished over time, becoming more and more mythical as the story is repeated over generations. This is exactly what we see with flood myths like Gilgamesh. They take the original historical account, the biblical flood, and grow it into a mythical, interesting story over time. For example, the earlier version.
I do want to actually address this point because I do believe that there is good evidence of flooding in the ancient Near East, and good evidence that these flood myths were based upon real catastrophic flooding. But of course, nothing on the scale of what the Bible claims. So again, that kind of helps my point there. The Bible is, of course, a much exaggerated tale.
Version of the Gilgamesh flood account clearly identifies the flood as a local river flood, with the dead bodies of humans filling the river like dragonflies, and moving to the edge of the boat like a raft, and moving to the riverbank like a raft. Centuries later, this gets exaggerated into a global worldwide flood, where humans killed in the flood fill the sea like a spawn of fish. Both accounts have a god or gods that are sending judgment, describe a worldwide inundation, have an ark built to specific dimensions that are loaded with surviving humans and animals, and land just a few hundred miles apart from each other after using birds as a test to find dry land. Myths often grow from being historical to being more mythical, but they almost never develop in the reverse, becoming more truthful and accurate over time. While these accounts mirror each other in so many ways, which account is the original historical one? The feasible one, of course. While both accounts describe plenty of divine
and neither account is feasible. And the biblical tale, you have a 500-year-old man building a ship and taking care of a floating petting zoo, and that's simply not feasible. And it's not feasible that such a flood would have been able to happen at all.
Intervention, only the biblical ark size, shape, function, build time, and flood duration makes sense. Let's see what Dr. Randall Price, distinguished research professor and curator at Liberty Biblical Museum, has to say about this topic.
What extra biblical text would you say substantiate the flood account in Genesis 6 through 9?
Well, let's work our way backwards. We can start with all the church fathers. Every one of them mentioned the flood, and it's always a global flood. There's no example in any of them of a local flood. And then as we move back to a first century writer like Flavius Josephus, who wrote for the Romans, he's writing a history of the Jewish people, primarily to impress the Romans because they defeated the Jewish people. It makes them look greater if they defeated a great people. But he's going into the details, and he talks about that in this place where the ark landed, they call it Armenia, they say that there are people who show relics of the ark. There's at least 4 different accounts in Josephus where he says people chip off pieces of the bitumen and make amulets of it, or people are shown these things who are curious to see them, or that all the history of the barbarians, he says, he talks about Egyptian and Chaldean and Greek, all of these have similar accounts.
And none of these are corroborated by other sources.
Of the flood. And he said this was the same as the legislator Moses, he talks about, who wrote. Now we go back in time, and this are those barbarian accounts. We have Sumerian accounts, the Eridu, Genesis. We have the Enuma Elish. We have Atrahasis. We have the Gilgamesh epic. We now have the Simmons cuneiform tablet, or the Ark tablet. And we have the Sumerian king list. All of these mention the flood and have various details. All of them talk about the gods punishing man, and one man being chosen to bring either himself or his family, or alternately, and certainly in every case, all the animals onto a vessel to survive this flood, this punishment. And then afterward, we have various details. He sent out a dove or a raven, which is like I mentioned in the biblical text, and almost all of them, when he gets off the ark, offers a sacrifice to please the gods. Well, this is not only in the same chronological order that you have in the Bible, but it's the same unique events and details that are in the Bible. Now, all these predate the Bible, and you could accuse the Bible of copying from them, but as we mentioned earlier, the problem is the Bible comes across more simple, more historical, more believable, while these are complex myths, and they differ among themselves in those details. But where they all agree is the similar core history that.
So there are actually, when you actually look at the global flood myths, there are some very significant differences, and the myths. Talk origins, global flood myths. There's at least one. I think there was one myth where it was flooded with beer, and talk origins. So yeah, these are obviously not the same story. They're obviously not coming from the same event.
Must have been passed on after the flood, and as civilization spread out and generations begin to go their own way, they develop their own myths, which keep that core common history, but add to it in their own direction. The Bible doesn't do it that way. It's not a perception. They're saying this is the way it happened in an orderly event. And they don't do like these others. They give you clear genealogies. They give you historical time frames. They give you dimensions and structures that are quite literal and actually work. Okay? So when you look at some of the weird proportions and things of some of these ancient Near Eastern accounts, the ark is a square box that couldn't float. It's a round type of basket that might have done this. Or, they all have the idea of a boat, but they don't. They're too far from the information. Whereas the biblical account gives you exact dimensions of something that is hydrodynamically stable, that will fit what it claims. It's no comparison when it comes to those things.
Jesus taught about a real flood and compared it to what the end times will be like. Jesus warned, but of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them all away. So also will the coming of the Son of Man be. Because Jesus stood firmly on the historicity of the flood and likened it to end times, the two go hand in hand. If the Genesis flood never happened, we have no foundation for believing in the rest of what Jesus said, including his second coming. At least for Christians, Matthew alone should destroy the flood as myth idea. Looking back through history, there are actually hundreds of flood accounts, and the similarity between these accounts and the Genesis flood are uncanny. Most of them seem to draw from the same common themes: judgment from God, a family chosen to preserve humanity, and loading animals. The early Chinese certainly seemed to have Genesis and the flood in mind when they invented written language.
Together with the Jews, Chinese is one of the earliest and the oldest enduring civilizations. It has a 4,500 years of unbroken history.
All right, right there is a problem. 4,500 years of unbroken history. The problem is the global flood was only supposed to happen about 4,300 years ago. Answers in Genesis, biblical timeline. According to Answers in Genesis, the flood occurred in the year 2348 BC. So if we do 2021, that would have been about 4369. So 4,500 years of unbroken Chinese history would alone be enough to disprove the global flood.
History. Every Chinese word not only expresses a meaning, it captures a history. Every character tells a story. And that the Chinese people were the descendants of the Tower of Babel. They were the descendants of Noah. Surely they want to record all these global cataclysmic events. So I'm going to show you that all these global events were documented in Chinese history. Now notice, watch everybody.
每一个人仔细看啊。
God took clay to.
神拿了尘土起来。
He breathed with his mouth.
用口吹气进去。
On two people, one is a man.
两个人身上，一个是一个人呐，男人。
Out of his sight came forth a woman.
从他身旁出来了女人。
And put them in a garden.
把他们放在这个范围里。
That's how you got the word garden. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, Of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. So God stopped them.
神拦阻他们。
Prohibited them.
禁止他们。
Now, to forbid in Chinese is this word, 禁. Now, how do you write the word 禁? Now, look. God put them in a garden. You have trees.
神给他们放在园子里面，有这个树林在。
He gave them a revelation. 启示。
还把启示告诉他们这个式子。
God gave them revelation about the tree.
神给他们这树木的启示。
Don't you eat it.
不要吃哦。
If you eat it, you will die.
你吃的话必定死。
Why were there two trees?
为什么放两棵树呢？
Because there was a tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Genesis chapter 3 verse 1 now. Now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. Now, what is the word tempter in Chinese? The person who gives temptation. Is this word? Look. Now, how do you write the word more? One guy came to man.
他来找人了，那个儿子。
Secretly.
私下的。
This is the word.
私
means secret.
这个私就是秘密的意思。
So this word 鬼 means devil. Where did he come?
他到哪儿去
He came to among the trees.
他是在树林当中来的。
Undercover.
在林荫之下。
He came as a tempter. So he tried to seduce Eve.
Oh boy, so much bullshit, so little time to respond to everything. So the obvious question is, the first thing we should start with is that the Chinese have their own flood myth. So why would they base their Chinese characters on the biblical flood and the biblical myths instead of their own creation myths and their own flood myths? That is obviously the first question that is begged. However, Talk.Origins notes a couple of very important responses. The Chinese character for boat consists of the boat radical on the left and the phonetic element on the right. The phonetic element has two parts. The upper right is a primitive ideograph for divide, though it looks like the same character for eight. The lower part is a pictograph for mouth. However, these two elements only have phonetic significance. The vessel on the side is the glyph is a pictograph of do not go now, nothing like an ark. No flood myth in China includes an ark with 8 passengers. So again, why are these Chinese characters based on a biblical story and not not their own mythology? That obviously begs the question.
Eve eat that makes it 5, and 3 daughter-in-laws.
Ability than the mythical accounts. The Ark is the only vessel in the ancient flood accounts that could have actually survived the flood. It was seaworthy.
All right, so that pretty much ends that video. How is everyone doing? We've been going for about 2 hours, 15 minutes, and I will probably go for about another half an hour or so.
This is the word. 私 means secret.
这个私就是秘密的意思。
So this.
Take a look at our North American continent. Do you see anything that might indicate a catastrophic past? One of biblical proportions? A catastrophe so massive that it pushed up mountain ranges that cover many states today? One that was so intense that it resulted in 13 states being filled with billions of fossils, including hundreds of thousands of dinosaurs, mixed with marine creatures? The markers of a worldwide flood that covered North America are obvious and are clearly still seen today. Let's go back in time to see if we can reconstruct just what happened during the biblical flood of Noah's time. Before the flood began, North America was different, much different. You couldn't even put boundary markers around what we now call California and much of the West Coast. South America was pressed up against North America. Most of the high hills did not even exist, at least not yet. The environment was much different, and large creatures roamed the lush green landscape, thriving in what was intended to be paradise. But when human wickedness became unrestrained, and every thought of the human heart was only evil continually, God decided to wipe this rampant wickedness from the face of the earth. Genesis 6 records that God said to Noah, "The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth." The process you're about to see unfold will show you just how life on earth was extinguished with the earth, save those on the ark. The Bible records that this fearsome display of God's wrath began when all the fountains of the great deep were broken up and the windows of heaven were opened. When this happened, the North American continent began a major transformation. Animals living in rich pre-flood habitats were about to be rapidly buried and entombed by tsunamis, mudflows, and volcanic ash. As the fountains of the Great Deep split apart, catastrophic oceanic rifting quickly spread around the globe. The scars of this rifting remain today, with some 40,000 miles of mid-ocean ridges visible on the ocean bottom. This rapid rifting caused oceanic plate to plunge or subduct beneath the North American continent. Just as today, ocean plates plunging into the earth generated earthquakes and tsunamis. However, because of the speed of this process, the tsunamis were hundreds of feet high. Nothing on the continent could withstand these massive surges. Early in this unfolding cataclysm, the Sauk, Tippecanoe, and Kaskaskia megasequences of fossil-bearing sediments were deposited over North America. Seawater rose globally as a result of new seafloor formation and increased thermal expansion. However, because only a small portion of the global seafloor had been replaced by new, warmer, more buoyant seafloor, these first three megasequences were mostly affecting the shallow marine realm, as the sea level was not high enough to inundate the North American interior. It was not until the later Absaroka sequence, when sea level was higher, that we see the first coal seams and land animals mixed in with marine animals in the fossil record. Once the Pacific and Farallon plates began forming in earnest, during the Absaroka phase, subduction began along the west coast on a massive scale. The weight of the subducting slab along the western edge of North America caused that region to be depressed, and the Zuni megasequence began. This rapid plate tectonic process and subsequent sedimentation buried the pre-flood lowlands first in the southwest, what we call the Triassic today, New Mexico and West Texas. This was soon followed by the Jurassic system rocks across Utah and Colorado, and then the Cretaceous system across Wyoming and Montana. Although the Farallon plate subducted initially at a steep angle beneath western North America, it appears to have been carrying along one or more large volcanic oceanic plateaus. When these plateaus reached the subduction zones at the edge of the North American continent, they acted to resist the subduction and caused the Farallon plate to begin moving horizontally beneath North America instead of at a steep angle. As the Farallon plate begins moving horizontally, it begins to interact strongly with the North American plate above it. That interaction first strips away the denser bottom part of the North American plate west of the current Rocky Mountains, shoving it off to the east. Simultaneously, the horizontally moving Farallon plate also drags warm, weak, and buoyant lower crustal rock of the North American plate along with it, doubling the crustal thickness beneath where the Rocky Mountains are today. Moreover, as the Farallon plate moves beneath western North America, its extra weight pulls down the land surface above temporarily to form the Western Interior Seaway in which huge numbers of both sea and land animals can be found entombed today. A considerable area of North America was covered by the Western Interior Seaway. This increase in oceanic coverage means that the amount of North American Cretaceous sediment is greater than Jurassic or Triassic sediment. This partly explains the greater known diversity of Cretaceous dinosaurs. As the flood continues, the spreading ridge marking the western boundary of the Farallon Plate gets overridden by the North American Plate. This allows the Farallon Plate to detach and sink into the deeper mantle beneath, where remnants of it are even seen today. Widespread volcanism is also involved in this process, with massive volcanic activity escaping from tears within and along the edges of the subducting plate traveling from west to east. This explains massive dinosaur graveyards preserved in sediments mixed with volcanic ash. One section of the Morrison Formation, called the Brushy Basin Member, spreads across 5 states and includes over 4,000 cubic miles of volcanic materials. Without a single volcano in the Morrison Formation area, geologists believe this material had to be carried all the way from volcanoes on the west coast, volcanoes created by the magma rising from the subducting ocean crust plunging under the land. Today, these subduction zones form the Ring of Fire, responsible for over 90% of our earthquakes. Many secular geologists agree with these general processes, but disagree with the timeline, saying it took place over millions of years. But think about it. If the mountains were created slowly over millions of years, why are so many of them filled with dead creatures that are buried in the mud that killed them? The thousands of mass bone graveyards in the Jurassic and Cretaceous layers are filled with both land and marine creatures that are entombed by the very mud that covered them, causing their death. In some places, this happened so quickly that only adult dinosaurs are found entombed in the mud as they were fleeing for their lives. Here's one massive graveyard in northern Montana that's over 1.2 miles long and contains 30 million fossil fragments, representing over 10,000 adult Maiasaura that were simultaneously buried. In this entire collection of bones, not a single baby was found. Every one of these 10,000 Maiasaura was between 9 and 23 feet long. Does this seem like the adult dinosaurs were stampeding away from the raging floodwaters, with 100% of their young falling behind and being engulfed in a different region? Many of these creatures were buried so quickly, their soft tissues are still preserved to this day. Finding soft tissues that are supposedly over 65 million years old is a very odd thing, especially in the case of collagen, where secular scientists have placed a maximum.
All right, so I already addressed the issue of dinosaur and soft tissue earlier in the video. Dr. Mary Schweitzer herself has repeatedly stated that the young Earth creationists here have been misrepresenting her data, and they need to stop doing so. And so Vesta put something interesting in the comment section. Interesting fact about the tsunami that resulted from the Yukon Peninsula. Research indicates that the tsunami wave got as far as Chicago. Interesting, I did not know that. So my partner actually just got home. So I am going to unfortunately start wrapping things up here. And I will pick this up at a later date, and we'll probably do some more of this stuff tomorrow. So join me tomorrow as we continue the marathon debunking of Genesis Apologetics. Again, I'm sorry that I am ending so early, but my partner did just get home. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up for the day. Have a good evening, everyone. See you all tomorrow.